So you're looking for land and you've checked out the real estate market and you found what you think is the perfect property.
The size is right, the price is right.
Except, hey folks, I'm Glenn.
I'm Maureen.
And today on Cabin Life, we're talking about how you may have found your perfect piece of property on the real estate market and you're ready to buy.
But before you do, we have some information that might be a bit of a surprise.
We recently discovered, thanks to our viewers who are interested in buying land in unorganized and organized areas, we found out that there are differences in planning boards from one township to another or from one area to another.
Yes, and what that could mean is that a person could end up buying a piece of property in an area that has rules and regulations that they really don't want.
That's interesting. Like, I thought that all planning boards basically were the same and didn't know that it would vary so much, which basically means you pay more taxes or less taxes, right?
Right.
So it's interesting because, you know, you could be shopping for land and you found what you think is the perfect piece of property. The price is right, size is right, but you end up seeing that when you know, if you put an offer in, you actually get the property, and then you move there, and then you find out that you can't have your trailer parked there, or you can't live in a small cabin while you're building. Different rules and regulations. For us in our township, basically the planning board has been off the radar.
Yes, and the areas that Glenn and I have always looked in for land, particularly the unorganized areas that we've looked in, the planning boards were strictly for severances. Like if someone wanted to get a consent to a severance, they would apply to the local planning board that served their area. And that was it. There was no zoning, there was no bylaws, so we never really concerned ourselves.
We didn't have any interaction really with the planning board, you know, so yeah, interesting. So if a buyer had looked around a little bit more thoroughly and investigated the township that they were planning on moving into and checked out the planning board and what its rules and regulations were, they could be a lot further ahead, right?
That's quite possible. So that's where it's important to look a large area, do all your due diligence to make certain, because you could have one township that has all these rules and regulations, and then even as little as a kilometer away have another municipality where there are no rules and regulations like where we are here. From what we've heard, some of the planning boards strictly enforce their rules and regulations.
So the saying, it's easier to get forgiveness than permission, may not necessarily hold true.
That's right. Like there was one area, one township property owner, it was Organized Township. They decided they weren't going to get a building permit. They put up their cottage. They built it too close to the water line, and they were forced to move their cottage down. They actually had to hire a company to lift their cottage and move it back just because they didn't get a building permit. Had they had gotten a permit, then they would have been okay, but they thought that all the rules can be bent.
So it may not pay to skirt the rules and try to get forgiveness.
A lot of discussion about unorganized townships seems to lean towards not wanting rules and regulations.
Well, it's understandable. A lot of people don't like rules and regulations, right? The fewer rules and regulations that there are, the better.
The better things
in my
are.
book, anyway.
Yeah. Like there are people who like rules and regulations, and if you're one of those people, look at an area, do your homework, and make sure that you buy land in an area where there's rules and regulations, and when you don't like what your neighbor's doing, you can do something about it.
So it's making sure that the area you're going to move into, the locality, the actual township, municipality, make sure that that fits you and your lifestyle, so that, let's say you don't want the rules and regulations, then it would be a good idea to move to an area that has fewer of those rules and regulations, as opposed to just blindly moving into an area that has lots of rules and regulations and then end up complaining to your neighbors and everybody else about the fact that there's too many rules and regulations there. In the meantime, across the road, there could be somebody that moved to that area where there's lots of rules and regulations, and well, that's the way they like it. And that's their prerogative, I guess.
Basically, everyone in the province of Ontario is under the Planning Act. So somewhere there is a planning board to oversee what you do, even if it's just something simple as the severances.
You're subject to that.
Yes.
Black flies are out, eh? So the planning boards vary from one area to another, and the rules, the regulations greatly vary, and the zoning bylaws, some of them have a lot of zoning bylaws as well, right?
Right, and it really demands doing your homework, because don't just assume. Like, there's an area called Port Loring in Northern Ontario, a very active community. And when we heard about the planning boards, I thought, oh, they're probably one of the areas that have a planning board with zoning bylaws and etc. Well, when I looked it up, and their planning board only looks after severances. They have no bylaws, no regulations, and they have a lot of services. They have an ambulance, they have a fire department, they have community centers, they have hardware stores. They have just about everything you would need in an organized township, but they're unorganized. I would compare them to like Manitoulin Island. Manitoulin Island, located on Georgian Bay, is what I consider to be similar to Port Loring as far as a progressive community. And that's when I was surprised. I thought when they had bylaws that Port Loring probably had them. But anyways, there's two unorganized townships in Manitoulin, Dawson and Robinson. And there's a bylaw which states what they cannot put on their lot. They can't put on a mobile home, a car, or a van. They can't have a truck, a bus, a coach. You can't use a railway car or a caboose or any part thereof can you use to live in or to use for any other purpose on your lot.
What about the little red wagon with a 6 foot by 6 foot box on the back? So with all these rules, regulations, these zoning bylaws and whatnot, like what all would that entail?
Well, some of the zoning bylaws regulate what type of house you can have. You can have a house, what type of buildings can be on a lot, the size of the lots, the dimensions of the lots. Some of them are for the use, industrial, commercial, residential.
So this is where all these restrictions and so forth come into play.
Right. While preparing for this video, I was looking for an area that had a planning board that encompassed unorganized areas, a municipality, and possibly a town. And I came across the hub of Hearst. Hearst is a fairly large town in Northern Ontario. And now they have the Hearst planning area. That includes the Hearst Planning Board for zoning bylaws of the unorganized townships. That's 5 unorganized townships included. It has the town of Hearst and the municipality of Matisse. So if someone was looking around Hearst to buy a piece of property and they wanted to be in an unorganized area, you would have to really be careful with that to make sure that the unorganized township that you chose wasn't one of the ones that is bound by these regulations and bylaws of the Hearst planning area. So you need to really do your homework in certain areas to get exactly what you want to get.
So both those areas, one organized, right beside each other, one organized, one unorganized, both overseen by the same planning board.
They're in the same planning area, and they're overseen by the board, but they each have their own regulations depending on what needs to be there.
So it may not need necessarily be a blanket rules and regulations that applies to everybody.
Right. You have the unorganized area, which I imagine has the least amount of rules and regulations. That's assumption. And then you have the municipality of Matisse, which they, because they are organized, they do have a little bit more oversee of what they do in their township. And then you have Hearst, which would have the most rules and regulations, more bylaws. And this is something that you, in my opinion, if you're looking for property in that area, it's something that you should want to really look into so that you get what you want to get, right? That you're in an area that serves you for what you want.
We were talking earlier on about how, sometimes, you want to fit the services that you get with your lifestyle that you want. I think it's one thing to be in a township where there's all kinds of services that you have access to, but you pay higher taxes for, and be in that township and then complain that my taxes are so high, I don't use any of the services. Now, if you put the shoe on the other foot, and let's say someone who moves into an unorganized township that has very, very few services at all, and then they come in and then they want to have a better fire department, more trucks, and more better roads and lighting along the roads and more infrastructure. This sometimes can have an impact on which way that a township goes as far as a services board and whatnot being created, right?
Right.
Like we don't even have a service board here.
That's right. Because we don't need one. There's no services to require a service board. Our fire department is a neighboring municipality.
Our roads are from the roads board.
And so we don't have a community center. The population here is fairly small and it's spread out. And everybody's quite happy with what we don't have.
There we go. Right. So what does it all mean?
It means doing your homework, looking into the areas that you want to buy property in, research what they have, what they don't have, if they have planning boards and service boards, find out what they're going to do for you, what regulations they have, and how much they cost.
And that way, it'll be a good fit for you, and you'll be happy with the rules and regulations that are imposed. Well, that's all for this one. We'll see you next time. Please subscribe. I'm Glenn.
I'm Maureen.
See you next time. Over and out.
Take care.